A few years ago, I talked to a friend of the family, and I needed some white oak for, I think I was going to make put a bed in an old pickup truck out of wood, and I needed some white oak for it. And he's got a whole bunch of white oak, and he was willing to give me quite a few nice sized pieces. And so this is bone dry. It's been drying for several years now, and it is beyond ready to be turned into something. So let's go ahead and get started. And yeah, of course, the first thing that you want to do is determine how big you want your coasters to be. Now, I don't proclaim to be a woodworking expert, so we're just gonna get my coffee cup, and we're gonna see how big a coaster would need to be to fit on the underside of this. My guess would be about 4x4, but I'm really not sure, so we're gonna check. So the bottom of this cup is, well, the very bottom of it is 3 1/4, but we want to go a little bit more than that, of course. From side to side, it's about 3 3/4, but you want some overlap. So I think maybe we'll start by doing like a 5x5 coaster. So then we've got to decide, how wide do we want the strips? How many strips do we want in this butcher block design? So what we have here is a piece of white oak that is 7 3/4 inches wide. But the problem is there's a live edge here. The thickness of this is probably, I'm not sure. Thickness is about 1 7/8 inches, somewhere around 1 7/8 inches. So we've got a lot to work with. You can make quite a few coasters out of this. I think I'm going to run it through the planer first just to get it good and clean, and then we'll go from there. So this is the same exact board after running it through the planer a few times. The problem with rough cut lumber is you have to run it through the planer a few times because, you know, over the years it sits and it dries and it warps a little bit. So you have to go through a few times because the surface ends up not being very level. But it always amazes me how much good a planer can do a piece of wood. You can take a dingy piece of oak or pine or whatever, and you can turn it into something just totally different. It just brings out the wood grain. It gets rid of all of the junk that's on it, and it's just a night and day difference. What we're going to do is set up our saw to take care of these rough edges first, and then we'll set our saw to 1/2 inch strips and take care of that. So we'll go ahead and turn on the world's noisiest vacuum cleaner. Junk out of the way. Go for it. So I've decided that this piece is a little bit too long for the little DeWalt construction table saw to deal with. So I'm going to chop it down to a more reasonable length, and we'll come back and we'll continue. Alright, I think the saw can handle this piece a little bit better. So we'll go ahead and set our fence again. We're actually going to set it to, now we're going to set it to 1/2 inch. Go ahead and set it to 1/2 inch and lock that down. Go ahead and turn on the vacuum. So I think what I'm going to do actually is take these and maybe cut them in half, and that way I can get twice the amount of coasters out of it. I think the measurements that I had, I would have gotten maybe 4 coasters. I think I'm going to take it and cut these in half, and I'll be able to, should be able to double that amount. So let's go ahead and turn on the world's noisiest vacuum cleaner. Let's go ahead and gather those up. Move this operation to the work table. So again, I apologize if the lighting is not quite what it should be. Like I said, I've got a light out in my shop. Gonna have to fix that. So let's see what we've got here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We've got 16 total strips. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take out all but probably about 10 of these. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That was a good guess. So that should measure 5 inches across, and it actually measures 5 1/4, which is totally fine. So what we have here is the raw materials for our butcher block. And what we're going to do, and I mean this is it is just as simple as this, simple as gluing some strips of wood together. What we're going to do is we're going to take these and we're going to grab our wood glue, and I prefer Type Bond 2. Type Bond 1 is fine. I'm sure Type Bond 3 is fine. I'm sure Elmer's wood glue is fine. This is just my preference, and you know, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But anyhow, so what we're going to do is we're going to take these strips and we're going to lay them on the side to the left. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9. And this piece here we're going to put to the side because we don't want to put glue on that. Now, actually we can use that piece to square these up. We're going to make sure we've got these ends squared up without any trouble, and we're going to take our bottle of glue and we're going to put a generous serving of glue on these little slats. And after I do that, I like to take it and do it in kind of a diagonal pattern. That really gets a good coverage on each slat, and I'm sure I'm going to have people saying, oh my gosh, you used too much glue, what's wrong with you? But you know what? A little too much glue never hurt anybody. Alright, so now we're going to close our glue up. Always close your glue up, because if you don't, you're going to leave it there. You're not going to get back to the wood shop for 3 or 4 months, and you're going to have a brick. Alright, so, and then what we're going to do is, we're going to move this a little bit, start setting these up on the sides, and we're going to start pushing them, flipping them back over, opposite of the way that you flipped them down. So I flipped these to the left originally. I'm going to flip them up to the right. And we're going to take our piece that we took off and square up that end. And the reason that we took that piece off, we didn't want glue on it. Because if we put glue on it, we'd have ended up with either a glued side that didn't need to be glued or double the amount of glue when we've already probably got too much glue. So let's take another piece and go ahead and make sure this thing is totally square. Make sure it's together just fine. And now we're going to find our clamps. I've got 3 clamps in my hand. Ideally you want 4 for something that's this long. So I can use my little small clamps with this. There we go. Alright, so I've got 5 now. So what we're going to do is we're going to clamp this. We're going to start with this end. It probably really doesn't matter much where you start. Alright, I'm not going to clamp it down super tight, but I am going to clamp it down somewhat and then start moving from this end to that end with my clamps. And that's 3. I'm going to actually spread this one out a little. No, I'm not either. I want to do that. Clamp that down. Good. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back and I'm going to really clamp that down, as we want, ideally we don't want any gaps at all between these strips, because those little gaps, besides looking really bad and making me upset, and making my wife upset because she's got to hear that I'm upset. Besides all that, it gives the potential for crumbs and junk, dust, whatever, to get down in there. Then we're going to take another clamp, and I am not sponsored by DeWalt, but DeWalt does make some really good clamps. Go ahead and go back, make sure everything is clamped down tight according to the directions on the Titebond bottle. We're going to want to come back in 24 hours and take this apart. I do not always follow directions, so we're going to come back in the morning and check it out, see how it is done, and I will see you then. And it's been about probably 16 hours or so. I'm not really sure how long it's been. Titebond, I think, recommends 24 hours at a temperature of 55 degrees or more. But this has been sitting here for 16 hours and it is more than dry. So we're going to check it out and see how well it has bonded. We're going to take these clamps off. And see how we did on this one. So that's going to be normal. You've got burn marks from your saw, and that tends to happen a lot on dry wood very easily. And you know, like I said, I'm not a super experienced woodworker in the first place, so that's probably got a lot to do with that. But anyhow, we have created a really good blank here. Everything looks great. It has bonded just fine. And so now what we need to do is take it and put it through the planer to get this down to the measurements that we actually want. Now, I really would like to have this at about 1/2 inch. That's why I allowed so much extra so that we could plane that stuff off. Now, if you don't have a planer, you can do just as well with a belt sander. And if you don't have a belt sander, you can do just as well with a hand sander, but it's just going to take you a whole lot longer. So if you've got a planer, that's most definitely the way to go. So let's just go ahead and put this through the planer and see how it turns out. is take my miter gauge and square off the ends. So we'll go ahead and do that. You don't want to square off both ends because they're just wasting a cut if you do that. So from now on we'll just go from this side. Now what I like to do is I like to take my fence and I like to bring it down to the length that I want. Now you shouldn't use your miter gauge and your rip fence together because it'll increase your possibility of kickback. So what I like to do is, because I use the gauge on my fence a lot, I rely on it pretty heavily. So what I like to do is put it where I want it. So I'll put it at 5 and get my miter gauge ready to go. And once that is in place, I will move my fence. So I know that this cut is going to be exactly 5 inches. Here are our finished coasters, and our rough finished coasters rather, and we're going to take some sandpaper. I've got some 150 grit right here, and we'll give them a good once over with that. They're already pretty smooth, so it's not going to take a whole lot of effort to do this. Now really, ideally, well, you see that? We're going to get some 80 grit and work on that burn mark. Really, ideally, the best use of butcher block is when you mix species together and you get all kinds of different, really pretty colors and grains that contrast with one another, and you get a really unique piece out of that. But today, we're just doing some white oak, and once we get some oil on it, we'll just see exactly how good it is. I won't get all of that out of there. I'll leave some and call it character, I think. Give it a good once over with the 150. I like to hit the corners a little bit and the edges to kind of make those not so harsh, not so sharp, a little more pleasing to the touch. Okay, I'll grab you a piece of 220 grit and finish that off. I'm going to grab the air hose and we'll get the dust off of this. We'll put some oil on it and see what it looks like. Out of there. So for something like this, for cutting board, you'd want to use an oil such as this one. It's Howard cutting board oil. I think I got it at Lowe's or somewhere like that. But for something like this, it doesn't matter as much because it's not going to be on a food surface. So people are not going to be eating off of it like they would be a cutting board. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take some plain old boil linseed oil, and we're actually going to get a different rag. That's probably way too much, but it's all right. And we're going to put some of that oil on there and let that grain come on out. So there it is. There's your finished product, and I've got 3 more to do. Actually, I've got another blank I'm going to work on too, but I just wanted to share how to do these with you. And you know, like I said, this is really not that spectacular. It kind of looks a lot like just a white oak board, but if you can see this, I'll try to get a little better of a close-up shot of that. But if you can see the ends, you can see those different strips that are in there. But you know, looking at it straight on, it just kind of looks like an oak board. But like I said, the spirit of butcher block is probably, you know, something like this table. This is the same species, but the different boards happen to be different colors. This tree was actually killed by a lightning strike, and it was standing dead for quite some time before it was cut down, and that gave you a whole lot of different colors and designs in it. But anyhow, so that's how you make a butcher block coaster. Honestly, this is really not that spectacular, like I said, but you know, butcher block carpentry is probably the easiest way to make it look like you know what you're doing. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to make butcher block coasters. I'm going to try to do something like this maybe every Wednesday when I can. Some kind of a project, some simple little thing in the wood shop, just to pass on some of the very limited knowledge that I have about woodworking. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I really appreciate you watching. If there's something you think that I could do better,